Welcome to the Personal Pension Radio Podcast, where you get unconventional insights into wealth building and retirement that actually work. Discover data-driven strategies and learn from a wealth of experience so that you can take your retirement to the next level. Now, here's your host. He was once bitten by a harbor seal, the income engineer, Kraig Strom.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Tosh. Fantastic to be here. I'm joined on the line by Ed Fixen. Are you out there, Ed?
Yes. Hello, Craig. Thanks.
Somewhere in the Southern California area, right? You're not stuck.
That's correct.
This time, you're not stuck on a freeway journey from Los Angeles or something like that, right?
Not at all. No.
Well, good. Glad to have
Safe
you
and
here.
Sound in the office.
Yeah, glad to have you on with us. Hey, everybody out there listening for the first time, and our regular listeners, thank you so much for being here. This is Personal Pension Radio. We are all about bringing together the education necessary and the conversation necessary for people to not only get up their retirement mountain, but to make it back down, to actually be able to get to the top and accumulate the wealth and the investments they need, and be able to actually have the income they need to save their lifestyle in retirement. And doing that is not a product. It's a strategy, it's a process, it's a plan. So we pull together all kinds of great conversations. Thank you to our listeners out there. Really appreciate it. We've got some awesome international listeners in the Philippines, Spain, the United Kingdom, and we even have some listeners in China. China's been going through some crazy financial turmoil lately, so maybe we're picking up some folks over there on the podcast for that. And also here at home in the U.S., we've got thank you out there to the folks listening in Maryland, New York, Illinois, and my home state of Maine. Thanks for being there. So before we jump in, Ed, I've got to give this short disclosure to set up the show. We are broadcasting now. We've had to change locations. We're broadcasting from Mr. Foley's van down by the river, motivational speaker extraordinaire. So Mr. Foley has been ever so nice to let us use his van. You're familiar with that van, right? Right, Ed?
I sure am.
Now, short disclosure. Please, 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 don't act on advice that you hear on a radio show, a financial entertainer on TV or on a radio or podcasts. I'm actually a licensed certified financial planner, and I'm suggesting that you do not act on advice or things that you hear on this podcast. You really need to connect in person, whether it's on a go-to meeting or face-to-face. Connect with a real financial planner one-on-one and get personalized advice and a conversation that it's about you. Look for the longer disclosure at the end of the show, but that's my short watch out disclosure up front there. So let's jump right in. Ed Fixen is somebody that I've known now for several years. Ed is actually president of Business Quest. Business Quest is a brokerage business doing business valuations and sales, mergers and acquisitions. Ed has quite the story, and I'll let him tell that. But I invited Ed on the show because when you look at what makes America great and what makes most economies great, it's their businesses. It's their business owners, the entrepreneurial spirit. And we've had a few business owners on the show, but eventually, someday, if you want to retire, you might actually want to sell that business. Right, Ed?
That's correct.
And that's what I invited Ed on to talk about is the idea of actually building a business is fantastic, but if you can't actually sell the business, you might be missing out on a huge opportunity. So, Ed, if you could, give us some background on, you personally. I'd like to start out just, you got family, right? You actually have a wife and little ones, yes? Well, not so little anymore.
Right. I got a wife of 22 years, a son who's a junior in college, and a young one with a 9-year gap who's a 12-year-old girl in junior high.
Really? Where's your son going to college?
University of Maryland.
Okay, University of Maryland. Now, did you almost disown him because he did not go to your alma mater at USC?
I went to USC to get my MBA after I actually did have my undergrad from Maryland, believe it or not, although he went there for completely different reasons.
Okay, gotcha. So that is something I thought was interesting education-wise. You've got an engineering background, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I got my engineering degree from the University of Maryland. I was born and raised here in California, but went out there to get my degree, and then came back here. Was actually an engineer for the first 20 years of my career, but always had that entrepreneur in me. Grew up with an entrepreneurial family, and eventually started looking for a business to buy, and in the process ended up becoming a business broker because I liked I saw what they were doing, trying to help me buy a business, and felt I could do it a heck of a lot better.
That is interesting. So you actually decided you wanted to get out there in that business ownership space, and
Yep.
went after it that way.
That's correct. Yeah, and then didn't find what I thought I was out there. Couldn't find what I started out looking for, and like I said, in the process of working with a number of different business brokers, I liked the combination of the analytical skills they had to have, the people skills of working with buyers and sellers, and kind of combining all those different skills as a business broker.
Now, outstanding. And that was how many years ago now? Gosh, it's been a few years, right?
Yeah, I opened up Business Quest in 2006, so it's not quite just coming. It'll be 10 years later this year.
Congratulations! That's exciting.
Thanks.
You are an example of that American dream. Starting a business, and actually 10 years you ran through. You've seen rough times, you've seen good times and rough times, right? To be able to look back.
Yeah,
on
I saw That's right. I started my business just in time for the recession to hit.
Well, one could argue that is the best time because you will have learned from that experience early on, and you can check that off your list so that you don't have to learn from it again, right?
Absolutely.
No, let's see. So
survived while everybody else, a lot of the competition was weeded out during that time, and we managed to survive and do it right.
Outstanding. The healthy ones survive. Those who have the education, that are out there learning, that are always willing to change. That's what we find. Those are the businesses that survive, right?
That's right.
Now, when you're not juggling a junior in college, a 12-year-old worrying about her hair and what to wear, does your wife allow you any hobbies?
A little, yeah, sure, a little bit. I golf as much as I can, which is never enough. I got into thinking that as a business owner, I can go out golfing more often, and it's just the opposite. But I still strive for that, and then obviously I stay busy. Hobbies when you're raising the families, watching a lot of weekend and weekday sports with your kids. So between those two things, that keeps me pretty busy.
Now, outstanding. So the kids' activities kind of become your de facto hobby, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, no, that's I have definitely seen that myself. When you look at your background, for example, out there in the engineering space, how does when you think about the engineering background that you brought from the University of Maryland, how did that ultimately now translate into the way you look at the work you do today? Yeah, well,
it gave me. I was always kind of not the prototypical engineer, and that I think I tended to be a lot more outgoing and sales oriented, business development oriented engineer. But I always one of my strengths was kind of the analytical side that an engineer has to have, that problem solving approach. That there's no one way to get any problem or challenge overcome, and so. That enabled me. I brought that kind of mentality to my business brokerage business, and in the terms of and you better be, because in business brokerage, helping work with buyers and sellers, you better be ready to overcome about a handful of challenges that ultimately always arise just because of the natural tensions of selling a business and the tensions between a buyer and seller and the anxieties with buying and selling a business. So really helped me. Yep.
I was going to say, I have to imagine you're also part marriage and family therapist. I mean, that's correct. You're essentially asking them to sell their child or one of their children.
That's right. Yeah. One of the downsides of what I do is it's great. I get to know particularly the business owners that I'm helping sell, I really get to know them very in depth, down to their family life, et cetera. You end up working with them for 6 months to, in some cases, it's taken a couple of years to get a business sold. So you know them; they're like a friend practically by the time you manage to get their business sold. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of repeat business in my industry, other than sometimes buyers later on come back, and after they've run the business for a while, they come back and want your help selling it when they're ready to sell.
Right. I can imagine that. When you're looking at this in the big picture, you might look at it in a similar way as I do. That one of the greatest ways that we have today to build wealth is to start our own business. I met with a gentleman recently who, 10 years down the road, will become a client of a business sale advisor like yourself. And the first thing that he asked me, or the first comment that he made, was more of an expectation, I guess you'd say, that he was expecting me. I'm a certified financial planner, one of those investment financial people. He was expecting me to pitch perhaps investments, hey, you should invest in this, or let me show you how I can help you invest over here or invest over there. And the reality is, I had to ask him, have you ever made an investment that has earned you a greater return than your own business? And the answer, of course, was no.
Right.
And my question back to him was that, so do you think maybe we should talk about increasing the value of your greatest investment and then keeping your profits safe? It totally made sense to him, but the world is telling him something completely different, that he should be investing somewhere else when he already actually has the single greatest investment that he's made. Right. And now,
you're preaching. That's exactly
preaching to the choir, right?
Well, that and again, if we, one of the topics we'll touch on at some point is the whole notion of knowing what your business is worth and knowing what factors affect it, and many times, unfortunately, business owners don't really know what that value is, or they might have heard from a friend what they think it's worth, or some rule of thumb, and yet they don't really have their finger on the pulse of that like they would with their stock portfolio. And I always find that a bit ironic, considering it is their largest asset very often.
No doubt. They can tell you how much they paid for a classic car, or they can tell you how much they paid for a piece of equipment, or what's the value of the building that their company is in. But when you ask them what the value of their business is, that kind of leads me to my next question. I mean, when you're looking at a business owner, when he or she is approaching you, what are the key factors that really affect the value of a business? If there's somebody's asking you that first kind of couple of questions, what are those key factors that we should pay attention to?
Sure. Well, the obvious ones that most everybody thinks about is the financial side of the business, right? And looking at their profit and their profit margins and gross margins and things of that nature, which obviously are very, very important. But quite honestly, it's still only kind of half of the equation, if you will, in a business valuation. You always got to be trying to reduce expenses, reduce your cost of goods sold, et cetera, and trying to increase profit margins. But the other parts are non-financial. There's a lot of non-financial factors that people don't quite understand, and what a good valuation will do for them is help them understand and kind of quantify. Hey, if for example, the key factors I see typically in small to medium-sized privately held businesses are the quality of their books and records. Some of them have great books and records. Just as many don't have really good quality books and records.
So you mean a shoebox full of receipts? Not a good idea.
Yeah, they're even if they're doing their own bookkeeping though, but they just they're just not versed in the real financial management and how you actually credit or debit certain accounts, or whether you should be capitalizing certain investments or having it as an operating expense. It's they're not accountants, they're not CPAs, and so they don't have the quality of books and records that if you had a professional doing those, it makes it much more transparent, which makes it much more there's a lot less uncertainty and anxiety for a buyer, which helps you get a better price, quite honestly.
Gotcha. Now, just a question as you bring that up. I know you've got. I'm sure you have other items that we need to pay attention to. And for our podcast audience, the show is often a free-flowing adventure when it comes to the podcast. And today, I forgot to turn on my call forwarding on my cell phone, so you get to hear some of my call waiting beeps coming in on the podcast. Those are special effects. There's no additional charge for those. So the question I had, Ed, was, for example, because I'm in the process of selling my primary house, our primary residence. We're going to sell a couple of our rental houses as well. So when I talk to my realtor about selling my house and I ask them, what are the things that I should or shouldn't be worried about as far as getting the best price, one of the areas is cleanliness of the house. Make sure that it's neat and uncluttered. How much impact does that have on a business sale when it comes to what do the properties or the ownership look like as it relates to the office or the buildings?
Sure.
How does that impact?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, and I'll get to some of the other areas too that I want to point out. But that's a great question because I didn't have that on my list. But interestingly enough, that is actually, we tell people, hey, curb appeal in a business sale is actually just as meaningful and valuable as it is in selling a house or property, and that when people come in and they see a very clean, I've sold machine shops that you could practically eat off the floor, and I can tell you every time when buyers walk into those businesses, they look at it and you can see they're already so impressed, they're ready, they walk out of there wanting to make an offer, just even on that first impression, which we all know is so important. So it's hard to quantify it, but key. It's very key. It's totally key. The cleanliness, the people just kind of infer from that the quality of management that goes on with that business. So it's a very, very important factor that's hard to actually quantify that or put a value to it, but it is very important. It's that first impression that we all kind of intuitively understand. Some of the other key ones, I'd say the most common ones is also at the time of the sale, and this is one of the things that's hard to do. One of the things that makes a business more valuable than your average business is if it's growing at a greater rate than its competition or other people in the industry. And it's hard to sell a business when it's growing, right? It's the last thing you tend to want to do. Human nature is keep running a business that's growing. But that's and that's hard to time. But I guess the message there is you want to, even as you're approaching a time to sell, you got to even dig in and work a little harder in trying to create growth opportunities. So when you do go to sell, people see, okay, it's trending upward, and they've created these other opportunities that I, as a buyer, could come in and take advantage of and get more value out of this business. So it's another important timing and or approach to when you're ready to sell. You don't want to just kind of keep it in status quo mode.
Well, that's an interesting aspect of the emotional side of things. We talked about that on a recent podcast with a professor from University of Utah, Kraig Strom. He talked about that the emotional side of a business decision is often what gets us in trouble. That you should sell your business while it's growing, not after it's grown on that last growth spurt, right?
Right.
Gotcha.
Yes, I mean, obviously timing has to be right where people are in their personal life and their other goals, but the message is, hopefully you keep digging hard as you're approaching the time when you want to sell and creating the growth opportunity and have your business going in the right direction. It's kind of counterintuitive. Quite honestly, most people start to slow down as they approach the time when they're ready to sell.
Gotcha.
A couple other factors, and I'd say the two biggest, most common factors we run into that can really affect the value of a business and can either give a buyer a big premium or take a big haircut on their price are, one is the depth and strength of their management team.
Oh, okay.
Depending on the size of the business, sometimes, unfortunately, many business owners are just so hands-on. They've got their hands in everything. All the customer relationships are theirs, vendor relationships, et cetera. So somebody that's put in place a strong management team where a common question I get from buyers who are meeting with and owners, hey, can you go on vacation for two to 3 weeks and everything around here runs fine? And if the answer is yeah, and if that is the case and they've got a good management team in place, that has a tremendous value to a buyer in terms of just, again, the anxiety and uncertainty of buying a business that as soon as they buy it, the owner leaves and half the value just walked out the door with relationships, et cetera.
Oh,
so
that's
a really key factor.
Yeah, that is an excellent point. I'm going through that right now with clients of mine that trying to help them back into the conversation about selling their business someday. And that management team depth and strength is a key issue for them because he, for example, the husband, he is the captain of the ship, and the ship doesn't really run well without him. So we've got to get it. He's got to be in a position where that ship can run smoothly without him, or they lose a lot of value, as I understand from what you just said.
That's correct. And there are strategies to deal. There's inevitably some small companies that the owner is the business, and then you just got to have a plan, though, to transition the business and be ready to, when you better sell it years in advance or at least an extra year or two, because the new ownership's going to want you to stick around for a little more extended transition period to make sure you don't lose any of those key relationships.
No, that's a great point.
Last one I thought I'd mention that, again, is a very common one is it's the customer. The customer base is how diversified is the customer base. It's probably one of the more common problems with small and medium-sized businesses is nobody wants to turn away a great customer. You get a great customer, but all of a sudden they start dominating and have 30, 40, I've seen 60, 70% of their annual sales is attributed to a single customer. And it's kind of this hard to turn away in one hand, and yet that again can really affect the value to many buyers. You can occasionally get a strategic buyer that wants that customer, and it can actually add value. But more times than not, the concern with buying a business, and then again the next day your largest customer leaves and your business is it's upside down is a big concern, and it's a big haircut.
That's an interesting perspective, like that some business owners are really excited and happy that they have a consistent relationship, great customer they can really rely on. And yet in the long run, the value of that one customer could actually seriously affect the value of selling your business, because it's hard for that new potential buyer, for him or her, to reconcile the potential risk.
That's correct. I mean, that's what all these non-financial factors are. Just if you look at it from the buy side and what risk is a buyer assuming, if you got too large of a customer, they very well may stick around for the next 20 years, but things happen, as we all know, and you lose one. The risk of losing a single large customer is it's just a big concern for buyers, and inevitably you see that resulting in, it can be anywhere from 20 to 30, 40% loss of what would otherwise be the real value of a business.
No, that's excellent. Good. That's excellent advice. Really looking to be able to diversify that customer base. Now, just a thought that occurred to me. There's a lot of folks that listen to this show who are entrepreneurial in spirit and have yet to take that leap into starting their own business. So just let me ask you this, Ed. The advice that you're giving now, people might perceive it as this is advice for an established business, and yet this advice, I'm guessing, could be applied to a business startup, right? If you start with these things in mind, then you're already there.
Oh, absolutely. No, I have one person I do a lot of work who's a business coach, and he actually, even not for startups, but even for his existing businesses and owners that he's coaching, he uses our business valuation. We go in and do it the first time, and then we update it every 2 to 3 years, depending on the company. And he'll use all these factors that we identify and try to give them some idea that are affecting their value as part of their strategic plan. And they'll say, hey, we've identified your cost of goods sold as too high compared to your industry. Your management team, you need to get some people in place and reduce the reliance of the business on you, and that becomes part of their 5-year strategic plan to increase the value of the business, which what we all, that's what you do in a publicly traded company. You're always increasing shareholder value, and you could say the same should be true for small privately held businesses.
No, I mean, I think this is good advice for anybody. This is good advice for just a sole proprietor, good advice for somebody wanting to grow into for that matter, into an international business. If you start with good quality financial records, good quality management, even the office, cleanliness, good curb appeal, as Ed said, that just makes sense. So excellent to think about. So as a business owner, right? So we've got this wave of business owners. For those that are listening, you're familiar with, we've referenced it before, the baby boomer generation is rolling into the retirement ranks in the 10 to 20,000 people a day kind of thing. Right. So that means a lot of those business owners that are out there now are eyeballing selling their business and retiring in the next 10 years. What steps does that business owner take to prepare for the sale of their business?
Well, it's interesting because if you think about it, it goes back to it's related to those factors we talked about, right? So I would say there's two starting places from my perspective or opinion at least. One is usually you want to know what the goal is. Where do you want to be? Which to me means meeting with your financials. This wasn't intended to be a plug for you, but you got to meet with your financial planner to know where you need to be when you're ready to retire.
Yes,
so what is your goal? What do you need to maintain your lifestyle that you desire when you retire? So there's the goal. Now you need to know where you are as of today, which to me is starting off with what's the goal. You can't have a plan yet until you know where you are. So having an evaluation done of a business tells you where you are, what weaknesses and strengths you have, and what areas you can. Maybe you've already got your goal reached. Maybe you're short of it, and you need to implement a 5-year strategy plan.
Right.
And implement that and get to the end goal, and then use that valuation as part of your strategic planning to get to your goal. Which again, it may very well be that time is preparing to sell is getting better books and records in place. Starting to do, which is very hard, the recruiting and hiring of good easy to say, get a good management team.
Oh,
but
no
that
doubt.
Is incredibly difficult to do and takes a lot of time. These things take 3 to 5 years.
Right. No, I think
diversify
it's
the customer base.
Yeah, outstanding. That's a great perspective, but I think you hit it really, your points. What should the business owner do? That's more for the business owner, really. Like the business owner needs to know, here's where you are today. What exactly do you want to do as a lifestyle goal after you sell the golden goose, your business? Mm-hmm. And if you don't know what you want to do, you have no idea once you find out where you are, whether you can actually achieve it, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's outstanding that as a business owner now, it's okay to get a little bit selfish. You need to know whether or not the sale of your business will allow you to maintain a lifestyle that you might desire. And
we certainly know what our retirement portfolio is as of today, right? We keep our finger on the pulse of that. We know, generally speaking, what our real estate holdings are. But, the gap there is people might have some idea, but very, very few people know, when you get into a detailed valuation, not some rule of thumb that can be incredibly misleading, that what's the real picture when you add up all your assets and holdings.
When you say rule of thumb, maybe you should give our listeners kind of what you mean by that.
Sure,
things that you should be aware of out there that people, I've heard it myself, like CPAs and financial planners will throw these rule of thumbs around.
Yep. In business valuation, for example, you'll hear people say, yeah, businesses in my industry sell for 5 times EBITDA, or 3 times, there's all kinds of terms out there. They'll say 5 times EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, or you'll hear it sells for 50% of sales, or some number. I've heard some numbers. I go, well, I've never heard of such a rule of thumb. But even when it's a good rule of thumb, okay, even when it's a decent rule of thumb, the problem is, again, rules of thumb, I've had businesses, if you use a rule of thumb, here's the value, but then all of a sudden you look at it and you see their single largest customer, 70%, and guess what? They're worth about 50% of that rule of thumb, and that's a very poor way to go about planning your retirement and getting to the end game. So that's the challenge, and the problem with rules of thumb is nobody is the average business, right? Everybody's got unique characteristics, whether it's the management team, the customer base, their growth. Maybe they got a niche product or service that makes them better than the rule of thumb. You probably want to know that as well, that you're maybe you're 30% premium to the rule of thumb, and plan accordingly.
Yeah, but you just have to, how many thumbs do they have, right? You got to be careful with that.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
So they're just very dangerous in that regard. A very quick down and dirty valuation can really, it can easily be 50% off, one way or the other.
Well, I'm going to ask you, I love to hear, success stories where you've been able to help someone who perhaps might have been off track, but ultimately been able to steer them back around. And I want to ask you about that. But before I do, what role does the business broker, the business consultant that the Ed Fixens, what role do you play in that sale of a business? Yes.
Well, so it's going to vary depending on the sophistication and experience of the seller and or buyer. But generally, it's your broker's responsibility. It should be his role to understand the value of the business. And I don't just mean from a business valuation, what's a number, but really being able to communicate and talk about business value in both financial and non-financial sense, and help prospective parties that are interested understand where that value is and or why it does have that value. So a good business broker isn't just somebody who takes a listing, has a number, what number do you want to sell it for, and I'll sell it for you. They should, in some cases, actually challenge the seller's beliefs or understandings in some cases, not just tell them what they want to hear. They should have expertise. They're gotta help the owner in terms of understanding what goes into the business valuation and many of the issues we just talked about, and why, and having the expertise to do so. Not just, again, I don't know how many business brokers, I can tell you, they use a multiple of 3 times discretionary earnings for small businesses. And it's a decent rule of thumb, but that's got nothing to do with the business they're selling at that particular moment.
Yeah, that sounds like a rule of thumb that just way too generic.
It is. It exactly is. Some are worth less, and that unfortunately that business will sit on the market and may never sell because of that overvaluation, or in some cases they leave money on the table because of that valuation multiple that they've just used a rule of thumb. So either way, it's not helpful to anybody involved. So they should have, and that's one of the things that we separate ourselves is because I'm a certified business appraiser and don't just use rules of thumbs in coming up with these. The other really important role a business broker plays is keeping that confidentiality. One of the most important things you gotta worry about in the sale of a business is it may or may not sell, and it may sell in 6 months, it may not sell for a couple of years, but in the process, you don't want to lose key employees. You don't want your competition finding out. You definitely don't want your customers finding out, because all of that needs to be managed in a very orderly transition. And so a broker, one of the most important roles I believe we play is also helping that to keep that confidentiality by being this intermediary, right? Where people don't just know. You don't just say, hey, Abco Manufacturing Company is for sale, and everybody's in the know. So we play a really vital role in keeping that confidentiality and getting confidentiality agreements in place before there's any exchange of info, and then also managing the whole process there to make sure that employees and customers are all kind of dealt with in a very orderly process.
Now
I'd say those are.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's actually, I didn't really think about the confidentiality side of things, but if you've got 5, 10, 20, 50 employees in a company, it's inevitable that one of them is talking to somebody who knows somebody else that could ultimately reflect negatively on the possibilities of that deal going through in a good way.
Absolutely. Well, I've seen it where companies, oftentimes a good strategic buyer is another competitor, but the challenge or risk there is I've seen companies go out on their own to those folks, and some of them just want to take a peek at the financials of that business and get as much intelligence as they can on the business with no other purpose other than to get a competitive advantage through that means.
Corporate espionage.
Yeah, basically, it's in a legal sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so there you go.
That's a real key role that a business broker plays, because they don't know who it is we're talking about until all the proper confidentialities and other agreements have been put into place.
No, that's excellent. That's a good point I hadn't thought of. So I mentioned it a minute ago. I love to hear and I love to share with the audience, the success stories. Do you have perhaps a success story of a business owner that was in that mode, thinking about it, kind of maybe, that you were really able to just help them right the ship, get it ready, and reach a successful outcome? Is there one or two that comes to mind?
Sure. Yeah, there's one that comes to mind, and both of these are fairly recent, and so they come to mind fairly quickly. They're both just earlier this year. We had one owner that we managed to, prepared a nice marketing package for the business, and it's not often you get full price offers for businesses. It's more common they're 80 to 90% of asking price. But we managed to bring in a full price offer and deal and a very motivated buyer. And unfortunately, the buyer needed an SBA loan, and SBA at first they denied the loan, because what happens with SBA loans is as soon as you go over a certain amount of about $300,000 loan, they require an independent third party appraisal, even though you've got a willing buyer to pay that much. So, but in the process, we were able, because of our knowledge and expertise with business valuation, we were able to convince the lender that the asking and selling price was actually commensurate with the value of the business. And even though we thought it multiple times the deal was going to die, we were able to save that one, and the owner got basically all cash at closing at full asking price, because we were able to get SBA and work with them towards understanding the real value in that business and why it was justified. So that was a really good success story that we were very proud of. Another one was we had an owner who had a very successful aerospace precision machining business, did a lot of military work, etc. He's a disabled veteran, and so one of his biggest concerns was he also wanted all cash at closing. He wanted to know that his retirement would be safe and sound and not have to rely on any sort of financing that may or may not happen down the road. And the thing about that business that we're very proud of is we literally had to sell it 4 times. We went through 4 different buyers, and that's not uncommon. Or 4 is uncommon. But losing a deal, having a deal fall through once or twice in the process, it's not that uncommon. But we basically sold this thing 4 times, with buyers pulling out at the 12th hour the first 3 times, and it took us over 2 years on what was a very attractive, very profitable, growing business. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, we got him his asking price and all cash, and persevered through all the challenges we ran into. So,
oh my gosh,
I consider that a great success story.
That you're gonna have to get that. You would have to get that business owner a cardiologist to go along with the deal, right?
Yeah, we all needed a therapist after that one.
Oh my goodness, that would just be amazing. Well, that's really outstanding, and I can't stress it enough to the folks who are listening that if you ever thought of starting your own business, go for it. Don't wait. Go for it. If you're going to start the business, though, start a business. Don't turn a hobby into a hobby that is still a job. Start a business. Ed has some fantastic resources on his website, businessquestbrokers.com. We're going to link all of this to the show notes, but he has some outstanding articles and some information that if you want to buy a business, let's say you've thought about buying a franchise, or you are a business owner and you want to maybe start getting some information about selling your business, we're going to link directly to his website on the show notes, but you can also go to businessquestbrokers.com and tons of information there. Check the show notes and you'll be able to get the links to the articles. There's 3 of them that we're going to put up. You can get all of them on the website, but why sales of businesses fall apart. A more detailed conversation there about the things that can blow up a sale. The other one is, are you ready to exit? Kind of getting that conversation started as a business owner. Are you ready to actually get out? And then a buyer introduction. If you're thinking about being a buyer of a business. Ed, can you think of any other resources or any other suggestions that you might want to offer up to the listeners?
Well, again, I would just say if you're more interested in starting a business, you definitely want to find your regional SBA office, because that's really what they're really good at, is giving you the resources there that are free and helping you understand the process of starting a business, even getting financing perhaps for that, the resources you're going to need. So they're great at that for the startup. And the story behind the startup is it's a less costly way to go about starting a business or getting into a new business. The challenge with new businesses is the risk of, the story of how many businesses make it through their first 5 years, and it's a very low percentage. And that's the story behind why somebody might consider paying more when you buy an existing business, because you're taking a lot of the risk out of that equation if it's an established business.
Right.
It's just a matter of going in there and maintaining and building on what success has already been put in place.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So those are the 2 pros and cons.
Excellent. Well, this has been fantastic, Ed. It goes so quick, and you're just absolutely a wealth of information on this. Definitely check the show notes, folks. Head on over to iTunes. Ed, thank you so much. We'll be back again on Personal Pension Radio. Check us out. Share us with your friends. Don't forget to leave your reviews on iTunes. Thanks again, Ed.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to the Personal Pension Radio Podcast. If you missed anything during the show, that's okay. We took the notes for you. Check the show notes for links, offers, and a full transcript. And don't forget to head over to personalpensionradio.com and download your free retirement income report. While you're there, we'd appreciate some iTunes love. Please leave us a fantastic rating on iTunes by going to personalpensionradio.com/iTunes. Thanks again for listening.